What do you do when your Streptocarpus makes a baby on a flower stem? Well, that's what I'm going to show you in this video. This nice little Streptocarpus here has started making a baby growing right at the tip where the buds are. Now, I'm not sure what to call this baby. If this had been an orchid, I would call it a Keikis. And on orchids, they develop on the flower stem, and once they make roots, you just break them off and pot them up. I have seen the term basket used for these on African violets, but I haven't found a term that's commonly used when we're talking about Streptocarpus, so I'll just call it a baby plant. What happens sometimes is that right at the tip where the flower is, you'll start growing a new plant. And it starts by making leaves, and sometimes those leaves even start to flower, but there are no roots. I've left this one quite a long time now, and it's quite large, and it still doesn't have any roots. If you cut these off, pot them up, they will make roots, and you'll have a baby plant that is identical to the parent. Very similar to taking leaf cuttings, except now you've got a whole crown, and it grows much faster this way. When should you cut these off? Well, it really doesn't matter, but I would wait until the leaves are about the size of your baby fingernail, or even larger. If you wait too long, it doesn't harm the plant, and they actually root a little easier, because there's more plant material there to create roots, so it's less likely to dry out on you. The smaller it is, the more difficult it is to create roots. Now let me show you how to do this. The first thing to do is to cut off the baby plant. To do that, I use a small pair of scissors, and I reach down as far as I can to the crown of the plant and just snip it off. Now let me show you how I plant these Keikis. I've just cut this off the mother plant, and I do leave a bit of a stem here. It doesn't have to be quite this long, but you want at least a good inch. That will help hold it in the pot. The next thing I do is I check the crown to make sure there are no buds in here. I don't want this thing flowering, so if I see any buds, I just grab them with my tweezers and pull the bud off. As I'm waiting for this to root, I also check it every couple weeks, and if I see any buds forming, I pull them off. I don't want this thing flowering. Planting is pretty simple. Just loosen the soil a little bit, stick it in. I like to plant these so that the base of the leaves is actually covered with soil. So I would normally plant it this deep. I want soil and moisture right up to the base of the leaves because that's where the roots are going to form. And don't forget to label them. Once they're planted, water this well, let it drain, and then I put the whole pot inside a baggie. That gives it a high humidity all around the plant. And we need that because these don't have any roots. We want to keep them from drying out. So they have to be in 100% humidity, and the baggie does that. It makes a little greenhouse around them. Once these root, you can open that bag and let these guys get used to normal humidity. But until that point, I leave the bag completely closed. How long does rooting take? Well, that really depends on the plant and the cutting. I find Keikis with larger leaves root faster than small ones. So it's worthwhile leaving them on the mother plant a little longer. In any event, this is going to take several weeks. I'd say anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks before you'll see roots. If you start seeing new leaves develop from the crown of the plant, it's a real good sign that you have root farther down. If you're not sure, just dig them up. You won't do any damage. Just be gentle, dig them up, have a look for roots. If you find some, pot it back where it was. Here are a couple Keikis that I started about 3 weeks ago. They were put in my Pro Mix soil, and then they were put inside a baggie, so they had 100% humidity. If you look at the first one here, there are no roots anywhere along the stem, either up here or at the bottom. The leaves are nice and firm, and that's really what I'm looking for. As long as the leaves are green and firm, this thing is doing all right. You don't want to see the stem get mushy, and you don't want the leaves going black. As long as everything's green and healthy, I'm pretty confident that this will still make roots. And I expect the roots to come out right here, not at the bottom. Here's another one that was a little larger, but it was started at the same time as this one. Now there are no roots at the bottom, but there's several nice long roots here. They're about a ½ inch long. You're not going to be able to see them. They're white and they're covered in soil now. There's one here, another large one here with a side branch. And that's pretty typical. The roots come out right at the base of the leaves. And that's why when I pot these up, I usually pot them so that the soil level is up at this height. I use these particular ones to do a test, and they weren't planted quite as deep as I usually do. The soil level only came up to about here, and I wanted to see if I could root this stem. I put the stem in some rooting hormone, and I was hoping that would initiate roots down here, but that didn't happen. I still got roots up here even though they weren't really covered with much soil, and the reason for that is that this plant was growing in 100% humidity. When a strep finds itself in that kind of humidity, it tends to make roots above the soil level. Here are some older Keikis that have a good root system started. If we have a look at the smaller one here, you can see the original leaf is this, and there's the old flower stem that was sticking up. The end of this leaf is starting to go black, and that's not really a great sign. But I'm not too worried about this because I see a nice root ball here. These are all roots here. Not only that, but I have a new leaf growing out of the center of these roots. I can now take this and pot it up, and it will flower in 3 to 5 months. Here's one that's a little larger. The original leaves are these out here, and it's now grown a whole bunch of new leaves here. If I turn this over, the original flower stem is here, and these are all roots. Nice white roots sticking out. Now you're probably not going to be able to see that because they're quite small, but there's a nice root clump here, an even bigger clump here, a nice root going out here, and a new set of leaves. Time to give it its own pot. Now over the next little while, these older leaves will probably dry up, and that's okay. Got lots of new leaves coming, and in no time at all, this thing will be flowering. Let me show you another one. I probably cut this one off about 2 months ago. You can see the original flower stem here, the leaves coming out the top. It was buried up to this point here. You might be able to just make out a couple nice roots coming out here. And we have some new leaves growing here. That's all a good sign. New leaves and roots, very easy to now grow this into a full-size plant. The reason I'm showing you this one is that it's done something unusual. If we look at the base, you'll see there's also a set of roots at the base of this cutting. Not only roots, but there's a new plant growing here. Remember, all of this was underneath the soil. I didn't see this until I pulled it up to make the video. Usually they don't root at the bottom of this cutting, but I am trying to put some rooting hormone on these cuttings to see if I can get them to root down here. That might produce roots faster and get us a flowering plant faster, but I'm not sure it's working. Most of the tests I've done, I haven't got roots down here, so this may just be an odd cutting. Alright, so what do you do with this cutting now? Well, I can ignore this down here and just pot it up so that the soil is up here, and this part will grow into a normal plant. Streptocarpus will grow leaves right through the soil, so this leaf here will develop and eventually come out of the soil. We're quite able to do that. The other option I do have is to cut it right here, turn it into 2 plants. I'm pretty sure that if I cut this, both parts will grow just fine because they have leaves and roots ready to go. Another option is I could take this and plant it very shallow but on a horizontal basis. So instead of planting it up and down like this, I plant it horizontally. This will grow into a plant, and this will grow into a plant, and then when they're both larger, then I can cut it in half. It really depends on how many plants you want to make out of this guy. Now let's have a look at a much older Keiki. I don't know how old this is because unfortunately I don't date these, but I'm going to guess that this was started 4 months ago. I think this was one of the original leaves, and this was one of the original leaves. They've grown a little bit. This leaf over here looks like a new leaf, but it may have started at the time I took the cutting. What's interesting here is the size of these leaves and the fact that it's starting to flower. There's a bud here, and there's another bud coming here. These buds are actually backwards. You generally find the larger one farther back on the leaf and the smaller one near the front. You also have this growth in here which is attached to this leaf. So this and this are the same leaf, but for some reason the plant has decided to make a second side shoot on the leaf. This is all good news. A very healthy plant, and it's ready to flower. But what should you do now? Well, there are a couple of options. If you leave the flowers, these leaves will slow down in their growth. You can have a smaller plant with flowers. Or you could come along and just nip these flower buds off. That will get the plant to put its energy into growing more leaves, and the leaves will grow faster. You'll get a larger plant, but a delay in flowering, which is better for the plant. So it's probably better to take these buds off. Let it get a little larger. But these streps are so easy to grow, no matter what you do, it's going to develop into a nice sized plant eventually. This is one of my 2022 seedlings, number 119. So I already know what the flower is, so I just might take these off and grow a larger plant. If this was a seedling, I tend to leave these early flowers because I want to see what it looks like. If the flowers aren't anything special, I might as well get rid of it earlier. There's no sense in growing a big plant and then finding out it's not a very good flower. I haven't quite decided which way I'm going with this. I like the flowers, so I just might leave it and see what it does. So that's how you grow a Keikis from a Streptocarpus. Now, is this something that's worth doing? Is it easier to grow a Keikis or just to do a leaf cutting? Well, the Keikis has the advantage that it will grow into a good-sized plant faster, but you usually only end up with one plant. If you do leaf cuttings, it's a slower process, but you will end up with a bunch of plants. So you really have to sit down and decide what your goal is. If you're doing this for yourself and you only want a second spare, then Keikis work really well. The other problem, of course, is that not all Streptocarpus make Keikis. Some seem to make it much more easily than others. And so far, I don't know of a way to force them to make the Keikis. You kind of have to wait till the plant decides to do it on its own, and once you see them, decide whether you want to use it. If you want to learn how to propagate from leaf cuttings, or if you have any other questions about growing Streptocarpus, I have a whole library of videos to tell you how to do that, and the link for that is on the screen right now. Have fun with your streps.